15. Juris Khan did not shirk when it came to rewarding the mercenaries who had chosen to depart. Control marveled at the riches he rained upon the men. Gold coins, glittering diamonds, scarlet rubies, and so much more. The only limit to what the men received had to do with how much they themselves could carry, for the Lord of Ureh had no horses or other animals to give them. That did not seem to bother Jadis and the rest, though. They found the bounty they had received more than sufficient. Come back to us again, once Ureh stands among the mighty kingdoms of the world, and I shall make amends. Lord Khan informed them. All of you are ever welcome here. The soldier's host had arranged a ceremony in the grand chamber where once he had been imprisoned. A legion of courtiers clad in their finest flanked Kentril and the rest, clapping enthusiastically at various points during the master's speech. Kentril had met many of the nobles at least twice now, but still could not recall any names other than Atana and her father. Those in the palace seemed almost of a single kind, voices constantly an echo of the great Lord Khan. That did not entirely surprise the captain, of course, for powerful rulers often ended up surrounded by such. And in a realm as blessed as Ureh, what reason would anyone have to do otherwise? Juris Khan had seen them through the worst that anyone could possibly imagine. Kentril himself bid the men farewell once the ceremony had ended. He reminded the six of the safest route possible through the jungle and emphasized the importance of avoiding the deeper waterways. Once you reach Kuros, the way should be clear. Just try not to let anyone see everything you bring with you. We'll be careful, Captain, Orlith bellowed. Gorst clapped each man on the back, sending most staggering, and, like a dutiful parent, told them to remember everything the captain had taught them. At a signal from Halbord, the six saluted their commander, then headed out. Kentril and Gorst followed the party to the outer gate, wishing each man the best again. Although the breaking up of a company always affected Captain Dumont more than he revealed, watching the surviving men depart now nearly shattered the mask of strength he generally wore at such times. Bad enough that so many would not be returning home, but the dark shadow cloaking the kingdom made him feel as if the six left dead in the night. Both the men and their escorts carried torches just so they could see the steep steps. While Kentril knew that, just beyond Nymyr, the sun had only an hour before risen, he could not help but worrying about nighttime predators, or enemy warriors hiding in the dark. Even knowing such vile dangers existed mostly in his mind, it was all the captain could do to not go chasing after all the others.
Think they'll be okay?
Gorst asked suddenly. Why do you ask? The giant shrugged.
Don't know. I guess I always feel bad when others go.
Chuckling at this reflection of his own concerns, Kentril responded, They're together, armed, and know where they're going. You and I made it back from the mountains of northern Ingstein with only one sword between us. He watched the torches, now the only visible sign of the party, descending into the city. They'll do just fine. When even the torches could not be singled out among all the other fires illuminating Ureh, the duo headed back to the palace. Lord Khan had given some hint of planning to speak with Sin about the work needed to settle the kingdom completely in the real world, and remove the last vestiges of the vile spell. However, what interested Kentril more had been the knowledge that Atana awaited him within. More than ever, he longed for her lips, her eyes, her arms. The departure of the other signified to him the end of his life as a mercenary and the beginning of something astounding. If not for the concerns he and Zael had regarding the truth about Gregis Masi, Kentril would have considered himself, at that moment, the luckiest man alive. Thinking of the necromancer, he asked Gorst, "Have you seen Zael lately?"
Not since you tried to find out about Breck and the others.
When the captain had finally managed to ask Juris Khan what happened to the quarters of the missing trio, the elder monarch had expressed complete puzzlement and a promise to have the matter investigated by one of his staff. He had spoken with such honest tones that Kentril could not disbelieve him. In fact, Kentril had even wanted to find Zael afterward in order to tell the spellcaster of his certainty that Lord Khan could have had nothing to do with the clearing out of the mercenaries' belongings. Unfortunately, even then, he could not find the necromancer. Keep an eye out for him. Tell him I need to see him as soon as possible. Gorst hesitated, a rare thing for the generally sure-minded giant.
Think he's gone the way of Breck.
Kentril had not considered that. Check his room. See if his gear is still there. The Rathmanian had few personal articles, but surely he would have left something behind. If you discover his room just like theirs, come running.
Aye, Kentril.
Now, it was Captain Dumont who paused, his gaze turning to the flickering torches and lamps of eternally darkened Ureh. By now, Albor and the men would be well on their way to the city's outer gate. In an hour, two at most, Jodis, Orlif, and the other four would greet the sunlight.
Kentril.
Hmm? Sorry, Gorst. Just wondering.
Wondering what?
The veteran mercenary gave his second a rueful smile. Just wondering if I'll regret us not having left with them. The gathered crowd cheered and waved as Albert and the others marched through the city. It looked to the young officer as if every citizen had come to see his fellows off. Never in his short career had he imagined such acknowledgment from others. Captain Dumont had warned him from his first day that a mercenary's life was generally a harsh, unappreciated one, but this moment made every past indignity more than worth it. "Sure you don't want to come with us, Albie?" Jodis called. "Another good arm's always welcome." "Oh, I'm sticking here, thanks." Albert had few regrets about staying behind, despite his earlier desire to see his family. I'll better return in, say, a year, and show them what he had reaped as one of Captain Dumont's aides. Lord Khan had already announced as a certainty the captain's elevation to the nobility, his command of the military forces of the Holy Kingdom, and the upcoming marriage to the monarch's own daughter, possibly the greatest prize of all in Albert's mind. Maybe we'll come and visit you again." The other mercenary returned with a short laugh. He hefted the sack containing his reward. "After all, this can't last forever." The rest laughed with him. They all had a king's ransom. Each man could live in wealth for the rest of his life and still have much left over. True, mercenaries were gambling men, but Albert doubted that the worst of them would go broke before a few years had passed. These jokers know the way to their own city gates, Orlith grunted, referring to the 6 armored guards making up their farewell escort. Solemn and silent, they marched in unison. Even Captain Dumont's strict training had never managed to perfect among his men. Seems like forever to reach it. And this load ain't gonna get any lighter. If those heavy sacks are slowing you down, Albert jested, I'll be glad to watch him for you until you get back from Westmarch. Again, the men all laughed. Albert felt a hint of withdrawal. He would miss them, but his odds were much better with his captain. He had always sensed the greatness, and now that had been more than proven. There it is, at last, one of the others cried. Only an hour past there, lads, and we'll be smiling in the sun. Won't that be a welcome sight? To Albert, the gates stood so very tall. When the party had first come to investigate the ruins, the gates had still been shut, almost as if yet trying to protect Ureh's secrets. Rusted relics, then, the recreated gates now looked far more imposing, at least 12 feet high, and so very, very thick, they could have barred an army trying to force its way inside. As with the doors of the palace, winged archangels brandishing fiery swords acted as centerpieces for each of the pair. And, was with the other doors, those figures had been battered brutally by some force. Albert vaguely wondered again how the damage had occurred. Had some Basil of the sinister Gregis Mozzi he had heard about taken to trying to destroy the symbols of heavenly power? The honor guard stopped at the gates, turning to face the departing soldiers. Their solemn, almost expressionless faces made Albert nearly reach for his sword. Only at the last the white-haired fighter realizing how foolish that would have looked. Then, a strange silence fell over the crowd, a silence made all the more obvious by the distant sounds of continual celebration, the same sounds that had gone on without pause ever since Captain Dumont had set the magical gem in its place atop the peak. Albert looked around, discovered that all the faces had turned to him, waiting. Jonas and the others found nothing wrong with the scene and, in fact, eyed him impatiently. Time to say our goodbyes, Albie. Gotta be going. Caught up again in the moment, the departing mercenaries shared handshakes and backslaps with a young officer. Albert had to struggle to keep tears from showing, and found it amusing to discover that Joseph and Orlif, among the others, clearly suffered from the same affliction. Be better if you go off before we step out, Jodas suggested as the honor guard started to open the gates. Good luck and all that, you know. Many mercenary companies had a variety of superstitions. One of those among men of Westmarch being that if you didn't actually see your comrades walk out the gates, then there stood a good chance you would be seeing them again soon. Seeing them step through meant the definite possibility of never reuniting, and the likelihood that some had perished elsewhere afterward. Mercenaries lived too chancy a life to not take to heart whatever beliefs might help them survive. In fact, that had been in great part why their captain and second in command had remained at the palace in the first place. Giving the six one last wave, Albert marched off, still uncertain about his control of his emotions. He did not look back and suspected the others imitated his ways. The continual noises of celebration began to get on his nerves, for he felt no reason for cheer at the moment. Even the thought of his own future in Ureh did not dissuade him at the moment. Louder and louder the merrymakers grew, the most adamant sounds coming now from behind him, where he had left his comrades. Albert quickened his pace. Once he returned to the palace, surely his nerves would settle and he would recall all the good reasons he had chosen not to leave with Jadis and the rest. But at that moment, a voice just barely audible over the raucous cries caught his attention. Albert paused, trying to understand what he had just heard. The voice had sounded like Orliff's, and the man had been calling the white-haired fighter's name. Albert took a step toward Juris Khan's abode, but the sudden uncertainty made him pause. What harm would it do to go back and check? If he had heard Orliff, then surely they wanted something of him. If he had been mistaken about even hearing the man, there would be no trouble or danger of bad luck, for by this time surely the six had long vanished through the gates. He turned back. It would take him but a minute or two to discover whether or not he had heard Orliff. At least then Albert could be satisfied that he had done all he could. The shouts of merriment had risen so high now that they actually hurt his ears. Did these people never rest? Had they nothing more to do than celebrate? True, they had much reason for their happiness, but even a mercenary liked peace and quiet on occasion. The sooner Albert returned to the palace, the better. At least there he could find some escape from the carefree madness spread among the populace. The long dead city known as Ureh, thought by many to have been a gateway to the high heavens. It is believed that every 2,000 years, when the stars align and the shadow of Mount Nymyr falls upon the ruins, Ureh is reborn, and all its lost riches are revealed to those brave enough to seek them out. Now, after a lifetime of research and intense calculation, the Bajari sorcerer Quothsin has come to witness Ureh's rebirth for himself. But that which awaits Sin and his hired band of mercenaries is nothing like what they expected. They will find that the dream of radiant Ureh is, in fact,
a twisted nightmare of war. One that will draw them inexorably into
a short-lived scream cut through the air. Drawing his sword, the young fighter raced the rest of the way to the gates. Perhaps he had been wrong, but he swore to himself that the scream had sounded as if torn from the throat of Jadis. Albert rounded the final corner and came across a tableau of terror that stopped him dead in his tracks. A sea of horrific, shambling corpses, husks of bodies, to be precise, swarmed together like the hungry, vicious fish he had seen once in the jungle rivers. Clad in tattered, soiled garments, they madly fought one another as they all sought to claim some prize in their midst. Their gaping mouths, rounded and full of sharp teeth, opened and closed repeatedly. A few to the side could be seen feeding, their gnarled skeletal hands gnawing on some bloody bit of meat. From within the ever-growing mass, a human figure struggled his way to the top. Orliff, his face ripped, his arms drenched with his own blood, cut with his sword, trying to reach freedom. From where he stood in shock, Albert could see that most of the other mercenaries' hand had either been torn or bitten off. Orliff saw him, and what Albert caught in that fleeting gaze made him more terrified than he could have ever thought possible. Then, suddenly something tugged at the older fighter from within the hungering mass of fiends. Orliff let out one hopeless cry and was dragged down among them. No! The shout escaped Albert before he could stop himself. Empty eye sockets stared unerringly at the stunned soldier. Ghoulish shapes began to turn his direction. Sense at last returned, and Albert turned and ran as fast as he could. Throughout the monstrous, grisly scene, the music, laughter, and cheers had continued unabated. Albert looked this way and that as he ran. but of the merrymakers themselves he saw no sign. It was as if a city of ghosts celebrated around him. Then, from an alleyway, one of the grotesque shambling forms reached for him. Albert leapt aside, slashing with his sword as he hurried on. The sharp edge cut through one of the wrists, sending the clawed, cadaverous hand flopping to the ground. However, undeterred by the loss of its appendage, the ghoulish fiend followed after the mercenary. The palace. If he could reach the palace, Albert felt certain that he would be safe. Captain Dumont would be there, and he would know what to do. As he ran, the city itself began to change, with each second growing as twisted and deathly as its foul inhabitants. Buildings rapidly decayed or crumbled, and what seemed like thick blood slowly poured over rooftops onto cracked walls and parched earth. The sky took on a sickly color, and the smell of rotting burnt flesh assailed the young fighter's nose. In the distance, though, the palace of Juris Khan looked untouched. Albert focused on the one bit of sanity in the world now gone mad. Each step took him closer and closer to salvation. Then, to his horror, he found the way blocked. A horde of desecrated, hungry corpses moved slowly and purposely toward him from every street that would have led him directly to the stone steps.
Make your
Rounded,
choice.
toothy mouths opened and closed in anticipation of a new feast. The stench they exuded turned the frantic fighter's stomach, and it was all he could do to keep from falling to his knees and throwing up. Albert looked left, finding an open side street. Without hesitation, he raced into it, hoping that it would open up into a path leading to the steps. Something in the shadows caught his arm. Albert found himself face to face with one of the ghouls, a mockery of feminine form, a dry husk clad in shreds of what had once been a very feminine, very revealing golden outfit. Strands of hair draped around the horrific visage, and a mouth opened wide in anticipation.
Come, handsome soldier.
It rasped in a voice straight out of the grave.
Come play Nefriti.
Let go of me, hellspawn! With wild abandon, Albert struck at the demon, dealing only superficial damage. He finally cut into one arm, but then recalling how not even that had slowed one of the other creatures, he went for the neck. The blade bit through the crusted skin and dry bone as if through parchment. The head of the demon dropped to the street, rolling several feet away. It spun for a moment, then stopped with the soulless face pointed in his direction.
Nefriti hungers for your kiss.
The head mocked.
Come, kiss Nefriti.
The mouth opened and closed. To his further dismay, the body continued to struggle with him. Albert managed to cut himself free, then for good measure ran the torso through. As the body finally began to collapse, the desperate mercenary fled. The side street led to a major avenue that was, thankfully, deserted. Albert paused to catch his breath and decide on the best direction. Atop the hill, the palace, larger now, seemed to encourage him on. If he could get around the unholy throng, then the way would be clear. With visions of Orlip to urge him forward, the young officer stumbled his way toward the hill. Now he knew what had happened to the three men who had earlier vanished. Surely this somehow had to be the work of the sorcerer their host had mentioned, the vile, corrupted Gregis Masi. The Lord of Ureh had claimed to have destroyed the villain, but Albor had seen enough of sorcerers to know that they could create perfect illusions. No doubt Masi had tricked his former master into believing his death and now sought his revenge. Captain Dumont had to be warned. Laughter and music continued to assail his ears. Now, the tones took on mad quality, as if those who celebrated did so in an asylum. Albert wanted to cover his ears, but feared that to do so would slow him down, even if only by a fraction of a second. The sounds toward his very soul filled him with as much horror as the demonic horde behind him. His pace picked up as he came within sight of the base of the hill. Only a short distance more. His boot snagged on something. Albert tripped, falling forward. He struck the stone avenue hard, sending waves of sharp pain through his entire body. For a few moments, he blacked out. Forcing himself to consciousness, Albert saw his blade a few feet away. He reached for it, then pulled himself up. Only then did he sense that he was no longer alone. They came from the alleyways, the ruined buildings, and the streets. They moved as one, with one vile purpose. They plodded toward him, reaching. Albert spun around only to find every possible avenue of escape filled with gaping, hungering corpses. He glanced longingly toward the steps, toward the palace, and knew that, despite his close proximity to the former, he stood no chance of making the final few yards. Curiously, the voice of Captain Dumont suddenly filled his head. Whenever possible, take the battle to the enemy. Better to fight and die quickly than to wait for the inevitable. Captain Dumont had taught him that early on. The company commander had also taught Albert the facts about a mercenary's life, how, for the vast majority, death would prove almost a certainty. Gripping his sword tight and raising it high over his head, Albert roared and charged. As he collided with the foremost horror, his blade bit well into dried flesh, crisp bone. Grasping limbs flew and cadaverous bodies crumbled. Farther on, the palace continued to beckon, encourage him to do his best. They caught his free arm, then his legs. Grotesque faces filled his view. The sword was wrenched from his hand. Still, Albert struggled forward another foot, two. At last they brought him down, monstrous faces leering at him, hideous mouths eagerly working. Albert screamed, "No!" In the vast, silent library, Quothson pored over the books left by centuries of predecessors, marveling at the work they had gathered for him. As much as he had savored the praises he had received from the courtiers of Juriscon, the wizened Vizier loved his calling more. Yet now he could not concentrate as well as usual, and for that he had to thank the fool mercenaries. Captain Dumont and the giant Gorse had left him with small but very irritating doubts about the veracity of their host's stories. Sin did not like having doubts. Lord Khan had given him the entire library and made him high sorcerer for the most fabled of kingdoms. With such power, the Vizier could become known as the greatest of his kind. "Damn you, Dumont," Sin muttered as he turned a page. "Damn you for not leaving things lie." "Is something amiss, Master Sin?" The sorcerer jumped. He glared at the newcomer, only to see that the fatherly Juris Khan himself towered above him. "Nothing. Nothing of consequence, my lord." Khan smiled beatifically. "I'm so glad to hear that. You've done so much for the kingdom, and myself specifically, that it would disturb me if you were not happy." Standing up, Quothson surreptitiously studied his good host. How could the suspicions of the captain possibly have any merit? The man before him truly fit every aspect of the legend that the sorcerer had studied so closely over the decades. Surely he, Sin, could better read the situation than a love-struck, low-caste brute like Kentrell Dumont. I am most pleased by your gracious reward, my Lord Khan, and know that I live to serve you in whatever capacity as sorcerer you need. For that, I'm very grateful. Vajera, it's the reason, in fact, I've come to see you alone. Sin's already narrow eyes narrowed further, almost becoming slits. My lord desires my aid? Yes, Master Sin. In fact, I cannot hope to save Ureh without you. The bold statement caught the diminutive spellcaster's imagination. I cannot hope to save Ureh without you. A flush of pride washed over Quoth's Sin. Here at last was a ruler who appreciated his fine skills. More and more the murky anxiety of the mercenary captain seemed but smoke. I am at your beck and call, Lord Khan. The taller man put a companionable arm around the shoulder of the sorcerer. Then, if you can tear yourself away from the books for a time, I need to show you something. He more than had Sin's interest. Of course. Juris Khan led him from the library. As they walked, the monarch of Ureh explained some of the historical aspects of the Holy Kingdom, telling how this ancestor or that one helped gradually raise the realm to its ultimate glory. Knowing that his host simply sought to pass the time until they reached their ultimate destination, Quothson all but ignored the other's words, instead noting such little things as how each guard stood at his most attentive when they passed, or the way the servants looked in complete awe when Lord Khan simply acknowledged them with a nod of his head. The tall elder man ruled absolutely, and yet his people loved and honored him. Against that, Kentrell Dumont's fears meant nothing. Sen quickly realized that he was being led to a part of the palace to which he had never been before. Near the grand hall, Juris Khan opened an unobtrusive door that the sorcerer could not understand having missed earlier. With a narrow stairway led down a passage only barely lit by a source undefinable. Deeper and deeper, Sin and his new lord descended into the underlayers of the vast edifice. The Vajera had expected that the Holy Palace had several levels below ground, but he was astounded by just how far down they went. No candles, torches, or oil lamps could be seen throughout the journey, yet the mysterious dim illumination prevented the two from having to travel entirely in the dark. Curiously, the dank, almost sinister aspects of his surroundings did not disturb Sin, but rather heightened his anticipation. Surely what Lord Khan led him toward could be a place of great importance. And then he felt the forces in play, forces raw and chaotic. Even before they reached the thick iron door, Sin already had some idea of what awaited him. The savage beaked head of a gargoyle acted as a holder for the massive ring used as a door handle. Quothson marveled at the intricate work of the head, so very lifelike that he expected the creature to snap at Juris Khan as the robed monarch reached for the ring. Tsarka, whispered Khan as he touched the handle. With a slight groan, the door slowly opened to reveal the sanctum of a sorcerer extreme. My private chamber. A place of power. Shaped as a hexagon, the room stretched wide in every direction. The Vizier could have fit his own humble sanctum in this place a dozen times over. Shelf upon shelf of powders, herbs, and various rare items lined every wall, while books of arcana lay open upon 3 vast wooden tables. Jars with specimens that even the well-versed Sin could not identify had been arranged on another set of tables to his right. Runes had been etched into various places around the chamber, wards against possible spells gone awry. From the center of the ceiling, a vast crystal illuminated all, its source of power, that which Quoth could feel permeating from the entire place. But most arresting of all proved to be the vast stone platform in the center of the room. It stood at least as tall as the Vajra, and etched in the rectangular base were intricate runes, many of which even Sin did not recognize. The platform, too, had been covered with such markings and, in addition, bore the symbol of the sun. Without thinking, the gnarled Vajra stepped forward to inspect the platform, running his bony fingers over the upper edge, and he sensed the inherent forces that had been called up in the past and still waited to be called upon again. This is very ancient, he finally commented. Carved before the concept of Holy Ureh had even been birthed in the minds of my ancestors. Built before any of the Eastern realms, much less the Western ones existed. Created by the precursors of the Rathmanians, my own people, and your worthy Vajrai brotherhood, good Sin. There are times when I questioned if those who hollowed out this sanctum were even human, but perhaps instead heavenly servants sent to prepare the way. So much power. More than any of Quoth Sin's kind had ever wielded, even during those centuries when they had made pacts with the supposed subdued demons. It is here that you and I will undo the last of Gregus's curse, my good friend. It is here that I plan to restore Ureh fully to the mortal plane. And Sid could well believe that possible. Such primal forces proved tricky enough to manipulate, but if Lord Khan could do as he hoped, it would make all that the sorcerer had seen before seem like the spell work of apprentices. Here existed a place of true mastery. I could do nothing, explained his host. Nothing at all while I was trapped. Yet I considered well what would happen when someone of skill could free me. Thanks to the treachery of Gregus Motzi, all sorcerers were lost to me, save my dear Atana. His expression shifted. But, of course, as talented as she is, she's not you, Master Sin. The spellcaster accepted readily this obvious statement. Atana did indeed have skill, enough so that if she had not already fallen for Kentril Dumont, Sin might have approached her in the future himself for breeding purposes. But to manipulate such forces required great care, exceptional experience. In truth, without the Vajrai, Sin felt certain that any attempt by Lord Khan alone would have ended in abject failure. In this chamber, Juris Khan whispered, having somehow come up behind the short sorcerer. With skills such as the two of us combined wield, there is no limit to what we can accomplish, my friend. Even beyond Ureh rising once more among the great kingdoms, the secrets of the world and those beyond could be open to us if we are only willing to chance matters. Quoth Sin could see all of it, all the glory, the power. He ran his hands across the runes, drinking in the forces each held. The wrinkled vizier imagined all of them at play, all his to command, to wield. Then he caught sight of a strange pattern at the very center of the platform, a curious, disquieting marking, almost like a stain that someone had not quite been able to remove. "What is that?" he asked. Juris Khan barely looked at the marking. The tone of his voice when he responded completely dismissed the spot as unimportant. "Blood, of course.